Hello and welcome to Console. Oh my god, I can't talk. Console Shock. Retro and modern gaming chat with me, Trev and Stu from Playnation Games. How's it going, Stu?
Oh, it's going very well, I've got a confession to make, Trev.
You can't pronounce Console Shock either?
No, I can't. Console Shock. There you go.
Close enough.
The last 3 weeks, I've just been playing Call of Duty World War 2.
Oh, seriously? What, you a casual now?
Online. I know, I've turned into a real casual gamer. Just playing team
the latest one.
On Call of Duty. Oh, it's just terrible. Getting too addicted to it.
I've got Infinite Warfare and it's still in the bloody... I haven't taken it out of the cellophane. I've got it for the PC. God. I haven't taken it out of the cellophane. I've got Black Ops 3. I actually made a big point of going through them all, the single player campaign. And I got through a bunch of them. The last one I did was called Black Ops 2. The story, I was just like, what the hell? I enjoyed it though. It's good fun. They're fun games. So my plan is to do... My favourite one is the two that everybody hates. I really like Ghosts. I thought that had a really good ending, even though it was weird.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
I like the sci-fi type stuff. And then I really liked Advanced Warfare. Everyone hates that apparently. So yeah, I really like that one. They're the two I really enjoyed those, but we're not going to get a sequels to either of them. So if
you never know.
If I announce Ghost 2 or Advanced Warfare 2, I'm going to be like midnight launch, full cosplay outside Playnation Games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like Whoopi Goldberg in Ghosts.
Is she in that? Oh, you mean the Is that the clay? That's that clay scene, isn't it?
Yeah, with Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
Anyway,
they should make a game of that film, actually.
We should move on.
You like Heavy Rain? They should get David Cage to do it. Anyway, you noticed that I've been buying a few of the older PlayStation 1 games of late.
I have, yeah. You've been showing them on Facebook and things like that, and showing off about them.
Do you collect PS1, or is that one you had a bit of a build up when you were young?
I do, but for me, I like to just pick up games that I really sort of want to play rather than actually collect the the rarer titles on there. So it's when I see a video on YouTube about a game and I go, oh yeah, I want to play that. That's when I'll go out of my way and I'll go and grab it and. I'll play it. Basically, yeah.
Yeah,
so I still get games for it.
There's about 1,200 PAL releases, and I like you really. I just get the games that interest me and the ones that I wanted to get when I was a kid, but I couldn't. So, but that's still I'm nearly at about 300 of those. But there's so many PlayStation games. There's going to be more games that. You're going to want to get, like we talked actually before we went live, the Dreamcast that has 217 PAL games, but a lot of those are sort of shovelware PS1 ports of mediocre games. So I'm probably only going to
PS1 ports. You got a lot of PC ports as well.
Yeah, not necessarily good games that got ported as well. So, and I'm building up that now. I'm getting more Dreamcast games that I kind of would think, oh, that looks good. But I'll probably finish on about 100 for that, I think. That'll probably be every good game that I'll want. Then maybe I'll look at the Japanese then, but yeah.
I think you should almost look at the Japanese now. Because they've got some really good shoot-em-ups on there and a lot more unusual games, especially for the Sega Saturn and the PS1. They've got, so many... much better sort of Japanese games out there that...
they got about 600 odd Dreamcast games, didn't they, in Japan?
I can't quite quote a number, but I know it's a lot more.
I think in total, the total library is about 700 and something. And I think nearly all of them, I mean, we got 200 games, just over 200, and America got about 250, but obviously there's a lot of crossover there with what we got. Yeah. We got a few exclusives. Mostly the football games were exclusive.
And Shenmue 2.
Shenmue 2, yeah. There's a few other weird...
I think the most famous one.
They got a few weird ones as well in America that we didn't get. Can't name off the top of my head, but they have got a few, but Japan is like massive. But yeah, so we'll probably do a Dreamcast episode because, the Dreamcast is one of the greatest consoles ever. And we need to cover it. It needs its own episode. But today, We've actually got.
What are we going to talk about, Trev? What are we going to talk about?
Well, we've got a YouTuber on today, one of our favourites.
Yes.
And the reason being, we've touched upon this before, that there are issues when collecting old games consoles. When you go earlier than really the 360 and the PS3, that the generation prior to that, you're looking at issues with PAL versions of games, which is what our TV system we have here in Europe and in other parts of the world also uses PAL, versus NTSC, which is mainly America and Japan. And that's 50 hertz versus 60 hertz. Our TVs run at 50 hertz, theirs run at 60. And that can create problems with the American versions of consoles and European and PAL versions of consoles. Now, we've brought in someone that knows a lot more about that stuff than we do. So we've got Riven from the Randomised Gaming channel on YouTube. Hi, Riven. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Trev. Hi, Stu. Nice to chat to you. Yeah, no, great. Interesting little discussion you were having there earlier. I was going to say, you didn't mention Headhunter as one of the Dreamcast exclusives.
Oh, God, yeah. That's weird, isn't it?
That was one of my sort of real classic of one of the best European games. Because I used to, I've got quite an extensive Dreamcast collection myself, but it's one of those consoles that, like you were saying, there are an awful lot of shovelware games. In fact, I sort of gave up collecting because I practically got all the games I wanted to, and then there were so many really bad ones. I thought, I bought a few of them for fun, like Exhibition of Speed, and I just remember playing that and just thinking, that's truly awful. I thought, I don't want to waste any more money on that. Some of these.
Yeah. I'm kind of doing that as well. I mean, basically the ones I'm kind of hoovering up at the moment are the ones that I remember playing on the official Dreamcast magazine demo discs. So I had to get that every month. So I'd get the get the demo discs, and there was loads of games that I'd play, and I'm like, God, like Toy Commander, I want to get.
That's actually a really good one, Toy Commander. I've got that myself. Yeah. That's a really good one. I really liked No Click, the developer. We did actually do a video.
Yes. No Cliche. Yeah.
No Cliche. Yeah, they did the two of them, because they did the two race. There's the racing one, but Toy Commander is a really, really good game. Actually supports widescreen as well, which is really nice.
Does. Yeah, 616:9. Yeah. Toy Racer, wasn't it? They basically took the engine from Toy Commander. I don't think they really had to do much work, really, did they? Just sort of condensed it into a racing game.
Yeah, it was like a charity giveaway for $5, I recall. Although I remember at the time there were a couple of shops that weren't selling it at the recommended £5 price. We're trying to get 40 quid for it, and it's like, no, this is not a game you pay £40 for. It's only a few races.
Yeah, it was almost like DLC for Toy Commander.
Basically, yeah. I mean, there was actually you mentioned you had the demos. There was actually a summer and winter demo of Toy Commander on one of the demos. They had like a special Christmas mission.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I saw that on my demo disc. Yeah, that was just like it was Toy Commander, wasn't it? It was like Santa Claus-y.
Yeah, this is a special like Christmas mission. I should actually get around to videoing one of them at some point. I've got almost every Dreamcast demo disc as well. Some really good ones, and one of the best ones. I mean, because you got Sega Swirl given away as another one, which is really nice.
Yeah, you got Planet Ring. You got that, which is that weird kind of like online only, which it's useless now. Well, I guess
and one of the really ones that spent me, because I originally wrote a Dreamcast collecting guide years back, was that they did the Dynamite Detective.
Dynamite Cop.
The DLC was on one of the demo discs. I still haven't got that demo disc. It really annoys me. I keep meaning to, but I did manage to subsequently get the PAL DLC. But what annoys me was, at the time, I rung up Sega and said, because we couldn't find it anywhere, and said, have you released this DLC? And we were told categorically, no, from Sega. And actually they had done. They'd stuck it on the demo disc. That's not the first time I've rung Sega and they've got information wrong as well. Another time we rung them about Mortal Kombat and Trilogy, and asked them, had that been released on the Sega Saturn, and they said no, it hadn't. And a few years later we got a copy ourselves. So I'm like, ringing Sega. Mind you, having experience of working in the industry, when you ring those type of companies, you're not guaranteed to get someone who actually knows anything. Assuming they
receptionist. You'd be actually hang on to that copy of Mortal Kombat Trilogy if you've got one. It's like a couple $100 now.
It's probably the rarest PAL Sega Saturn game.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? I guess it was released at a poor time, I think, wasn't it? It was near the sort of the dying months.
Well, I don't think it was that. I think it got released in about late 97. I think it came out after the PlayStation version. What I think happened was a lot of the shops thought it had already been released, so didn't order it in. I'd heard other rumors about it being recalled, but I've never been able to clarify or confirm anything. It's all a bit up in the air. There's some speculation it wasn't even released in the UK and was only sold in Europe, but all in all, it's just a real mystery as to why so few copies were ever actually sold. Because I was a Saturn owner from 96 onwards, and my brother was a huge Mortal Kombat fan. We looked out for it, and we never saw it in any of the UK shops at the time, so it was never carried, at least not by the major retail chains.
Yeah, I remember I was a Saturn fan then, really big Saturn fan, and I got mine just after that in 97, and then I was gutted that the PlayStation had Mortal Kombat 3, but then we got Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and I was like, that will show you, Sony fanboys, we've got the best Mortal Kombat 3 you can get, and then we got Trilogy. It was like, oh.
Yeah, we actually got Trilogy. The Trilogy is actually a bit of a weird one on the PlayStation. I've since discovered there's about 4 different releases of Trilogy in each different version. So basically, I know people normally hate the Platinum releases and like the greatest hits. But if you actually go check the various, it's not always the case with every game that gets those type of releases, but some the developers actually try to fix the bugs. And Mortal Kombat Trilogy, they definitely did. And sort of the last releases have a load of bug fixes in them, although you do have to sort of check the different versions because depending who published it and released it, depends which version of the code. But the developers did update it. There's about 4 different revisions, I think, when I checked last time. I've only got the original release as well on the Saturn and the PlayStation, so I need one of the budget ones with all the bug fixes.
It's funny because I'm the other way around because I've been trying to hunt down. That's a game that's on my list. I've got it, but I've got like the greatest hits version. So I've got this awful cover artwork where the actual Mortal Kombat is a tiny little postage stamp with classics and all that crap all over it. I want to get the original version, but that is like 20 odd quid more, you know.
Yeah, I'm of the same. I think almost every one of my PlayStation games, bar 1 or 2, are the classic black labels. But there are a couple of times where I've subsequently bit the bullet and got the discount one because I know it's got some bug fixes or changes to it. And that's actually one thing that's quite interesting. Partly it goes into what the sort of PAL NTSC thing that we're going to discuss is that often you will find that these type of games have a lot of hidden revisions and updates that people aren't aware of, and you can occasionally find the PAL release has actually got more bug fixes than the NTSC version because, of course, the developers, having not worked in the industry myself, you'll actually end up sort of being... We worked from a European perspective. We ended up doing the Japanese version last on some of the games, so that ended up with the most bug fixes. Whereas in the Japanese, they tend to do the PAL version last, so the PAL version tends to have the most bug fixes from their games. But of course, you get the whole 50 hertz scenario as well.
Yeah, I remember Dead or Alive 2 on the Dreamcast had that. It got released about 1 billion times, didn't it? Where you got the initial Japanese release, and I think the Americans got it. Then we got it, which had extra things in, and then the Japanese got another one after that to catch up to the PAL one.
It's dead. You're dead right there. It's I know. There's the Japanese had 2 releases. The one basic release, which is no extras, and then the US release had some extra costumes, and the European release has more costumes than the US version. Although that's not widely reported, because I remember when I had the European version, I remember like all the cheat sites only had the US stuff, but I spent time to actually go through and discovered there were additional costumes not in the US version, because I found there was a couple of costumes that weren't mentioned on any of the cheat sites. It's why I actually don't like a lot of the cheat sites these days, because they're really bad for copying and pasting one another and not doing their own research. It was actually what was really handy is I found a load of Japanese cheat sites, and I found a ton of cheat codes for Saturn and Dreamcast games in the past 2 years because I found a load of them. And basically, I found a load of cheats and sort of secret modes, hidden extras that that haven't been documented in the West before, and some of them are really nice extras.
Oh wow, I should archive that.
Yeah, no, I've been going through a few of them. Oddly enough, one of them, there's a site called Game Rescue. That's gone down, but fortunately, that's been archived in the way back when machine. So I still go to that. I can pass a few URLs if you want, because I've included some like a couple of our videos because there's some really nice cheats that I've discovered. So it's been very interesting.
Mortal Kombat's good for that as well. I like doing all the old one-button fatalities to be really bought, to not have to worry about hitting all the buttons and all that.
That'd be a great idea for a video, though, to go through and go, on this game, here's a cheat that has never been done before, and show people to try and get it out there and stuff. Because that'd be
it's actually a very good idea, because there's quite a few cheats I've seen that just haven't been documented. Admittedly, I was able to when we did our Marvel superheroes video recently, a sort of fight with the arcade game on the Saturn. I actually included the list of all the cheats, because there was some sort of nice extras like win pose. Well, not win poses, but there was some secret characters would pop up on the win screen if you did supers on particular integers of sites. It was like the 20th and the 50th fight. If you won them, you get people like Anita and Akuma crop up, and I'd never seen that mentioned before.
Wow, maybe the developers obviously wanted to try and see if people discover it, perhaps, as well. So.
Yeah, I guess so, because you consider how it's all the sort of hidden Easter eggs they used to include in a lot of the older games.
That makes me think, Stu, actually, like when it comes to like greatest hits versions of games, do you get people in your shop that are really fussy and they're like, oh, I don't want that now, that's the greatest hits version?
Yeah, sometimes the worst thing that happens is people will bring a box up to the counter and I'll go and get the game, and for any old game, and then the only disc we've got says platinum on it, and they go, no, I don't want the platinum one. And
sometimes you get it in a sturdier box especially in PS1 re-releases. You might get the platinum games sometimes have a sturdier box than.
Well, I think they're pretty much the same, really. I think the boxes wise, sort of, the sort
actually in saying that, something like Ridge Racer, you got the big ass box, didn't you? The sort of double.
Yeah, that was only the real early doors games, but the rest of them are sort of pretty much the same. But to be honest with you, 9 people out of 10, if we only have the platinum version disc, and then we put it in the box, they just want to go home and play it. And they wouldn't even notice. But then some collectors are, a lot of our, very good customers. They'll come in and if I see it's a platinum, I'll go, oh God, sorry, it's the platinum disc. Did you want to go for this? And they'll be like, oh no, actually no, I want to get it. It's got to be perfect to my collection. I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. I'll keep an eye out for for this game. If it comes in again, I'll let you know, and things like that, because well, there's some versions, collection, right?
Yeah, well, but there's some versions of games where the platinum version is actually rarer. Like one, it's just a sort of a sports game, but FIFA 2000 got a platinum release on the PlayStation. I never see it. All the regular, it's just the regular version you see. Saw one pop up on eBay. It was sealed for about £3, and I looked it up on Retro Collector. Apparently, it is rare, and I thought, crap, I should have got that. But if I see another one pop up, I've got FIFA 2000. I've got the regular version. I actually want the platinum version now. But I think that would have come out very late in the PS1's life. I mean, it's normally they normally make a platinum game at least a year after it's released, sometimes 2 or 3. So that might have been like 2002 or 3 when that came out, and everybody was already well on the PS2 by then. So that's a good example.
I was going to say, I don't recall platinum games. There weren't that many about 2000, but I know Game were really bad for mixing up platinums and standard discs, which is why you often get them these days. Just so you get a normal edition with a platinum one, or vice versa.
Yeah, I didn't want to imply that we always gave out the wrong ones. It was quite often, someone will trade in a massive pile of games, and then might be the platinum one in a normal box, or a platinum box with a normal sort of disc in there, and it's when it comes in and it's a game that we might sell for $1.99. I'm not particularly bothered, really. But if it's something like Final Fantasy VII, if it's got the platinum discs in there and it's the black label, well, hold on, this isn't going to be quite worth as much.
I'm not too bothered about in terms of collecting. When it comes to the PlayStation particularly, I actually like the way they handled the platinum. I don't like the EA Greatest Hits re-releases because they look ugly as hell, but the actual platinum ones with the silver strip at the bottom, because I think they've been sympathetic to the original artwork. They've basically kept it identical, except it's just got a silver spine and a silver label. I still think that looks nice, so I'm quite happy to accept a platinum version of the game.
Some of the other sort of classic ones that were just like horrible retro stickers. I tell you what they should have done, which they never did, is they should have redesigned the actual cover art with just like a little like sticker. They should have had a new cover art and just a little sticker at the bottom saying best hits or whatever, because that way you had people buy both versions. They'd be like, "Oh, I've got both versions of the cover art now," and the sort of stuff. But they Sony
I think they missed a trick there, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
I would have liked to actually see them do what they do now. Is you get the classics and things like that on the Xbox, or you did on the 360, but he's actually come out with Game of the Year edition or and try and include something else.
Yeah, they
with
don't really
it.
do it now, though, do they? They don't really do it. I mean, there was an Xbox 360 like greatest hits, but I think that kind of fell by the wayside. They just make more prints of the regular game and make it cheaper, I think, don't they? Or there's a game of the year.
I think they tend to. I mean, there was, like you said, there was an Xbox 360 Platinum best of range. I've got one or two in that range, but not many.
But no, they don't do it. I mean, the Wii U did do it with that awful, where they frame it in a little Nintendo Select thing.
They put a seal, don't they, in one corner or something? Yeah, I never liked that.
Yeah,
no, I mean, the games are cheaper, so I've got a few of them, but don't like the way it treated the artwork.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of those ones either. They sort of muck it around. I mean, sometimes it's the cheaper price tag, but it's never ideal when they do that. But the caveat is you might have a slightly bug-fixed version of the game when you buy those ones. So that's the silver lining.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of my favourite games consoles, I don't have to worry about it. Like the Saturn, obviously was never popular enough to have a greatest hits range. The Dreamcast, not in the UK, didn't get a greatest hits range. In America, they got a greatest hits. But whatever version you get, you're going to get the regular version.
You did get Sakura in Japan. There was a budget release in Japan, and annoyingly, I don't like the Sakura because basically they put a white and red border. They did look a bit ugly, but as I discovered, there are a few Saturn games that the Sakura versions did have some bug fixes, so I have bitten the bullet occasionally now and picked up a Sakura release.
Oh, cool. And the N64 had its sort of player's choice, which wasn't too bad. It was just a silver border around the game. I think it was only Nintendo released games and second party games that they did it for, but that was sympathetic again to the artwork, and it wasn't really that different. And good thing is you're more likely to get a boxing in good nick, because I think the ones that were Nintendo first party games, they had thicker cardboard than your Konami or whatever.
I know exactly what you mean. There's sort of that horrible, slightly cheaper cardboard than some of the first party ones. And
then the inner tray collapses, and that's
it's so much cheaper, and it doesn't hold it when they sort of stack them on top. So you have to put them on the side. Those ones, they're really lazy. They didn't want to do an inner tray. They clearly just let's save money by just trying to use the tray of the inside, and it sort of just gets a bit messy.
People
and the amount of those ones I've had a few of those in the past that have been absolute. Ones with the inner tray tend to keep their shape, but the ones without often tend to get absolutely crushed the living daylights out of.
Things we have to put up with, like we talked about, me and Stu on a previous show, about the dreaded PS1 inlay sag, where the inlay will bow, so you have to put a bit of bubble wrap behind it to make it look, relatively sort of stiff and sort of flush against the cover, the plastic cover.
Yes, I probably do have, looking at my PS1 selection of games here, because they're right by where I'm talking to. I think I've probably got a few with that sort of sag going on.
Get the old bubble wrap in there, sorts it right out, because it normally relies on a big thick manual. That normally does it, but later on the manual's got thinner, and then the inlay will just bow into the case. But stick some bubble wrap there. And the Dreamcast had the horrible hinges. The PS1 hinges were bad, but the Dreamcast one had the little arms that attach it on there.
I actually did this sort of case analysis a long time back. The Dreamcast one's a horrible design. They're just like you said, the teeny little arms. They just break if you drop, because they've got no strength to them. They shatter. You can literally drop them about a foot and they will shatter because they're so badly designed.
I've had them just explode in my hands quite often in the shop. They've come in and
set on fire,
and I've opened it up, and it just falls apart, and it's ridiculous.
You don't get people too fussy though, do you? The arm's broken on this, or,
to be honest, with the Sega Saturn game, I quite often say, "Oh well, what can you do?"
The Saturn case, especially because they were the early ones, because there's 2 revisions. You have the later hardback plastic ones like DVD cases, but those early ones are just literally a cardboard sleeve and 2 plastic shells stuck on.
Oh, it's horrible,
if one of those gets damaged, there's nothing you can do at all. You just literally...
Some games got 2 releases though, didn't they? I mean, like you say, there was 2 versions. I've got 2 Sega Rallies. One is the crap cardboard one, and the second one is the sort of DVD style case, which is like still in pristine condition without me having to do anything really.
Yeah, no, I've done that as well. We've got me and my brother have largely tried to get as many of them. We haven't got all of them, but we've got quite a majority of them that got the hard and the soft case release. I mean, quite a few of them did. There were some quite surprise games with it on, although we did notice that the lists aren't that accurate online because it appears that some retail shops used to use them as display cases, those things. So people often saw them in shops thinking, hey, that one got a hardback release, and actually, no, that was just a display case.
Some of them didn't get it. It was very inconsistent as well, where some earlier games got it and others didn't. Like Sega Rally apparently did, because I've got one.
Yeah, no, Sega Rally did. I mean, one of the weirder ones is Command and Conquer did. So, and that wasn't... Athlete Kings did.
Yeah.
Cop did. Virtual Fighters 2 actually got quite a few releases, because one of them there was actually a bug fix of Virtual Fighters 2 in Europe.
I'm waiting for a Die Hard arcade, because that was supposedly in a plastic case. But I keep seeing the rubbish cardboard one. I don't know if it's like in the UK only got the cardboard one, and like France got the plastic one. But I want to get that in a.
Hang on a second, I'll just double check my copy actually.
It's a game that I've been like. It's a very expensive game now. It's all about 40 odd quid. I don't know if you've seen one in your shop at any point, Stu. But
no, we always get Die Hard Trilogy, and it's Die Hard Arcade. And that's more sort of like a scrolling beat up, isn't it?
Dynamite Cop that we just talked about on the Dreamcast.
Dynamite Cop 2 was the sequel. In Japan, Dynamite Arcade was Dynamite Cop. I believe that's right.
That is right.
I just double checked. Yeah, no, you're right there. Die Hard Arcade is Dynamite Cop 2 or Dynamite Deku 1 and 2. Yeah, my Saturn one's also a soft case. I don't think I've seen a hard case actually, but there might be one in existence. But yeah, no, it's weird. They basically, because they thought it was so close to Die Hard, they got the license, but it means that Dynamite Cop, basically it was Dynamite Deku and Dynamite Deku 2, and there's also Dynamite Deku, it's like EX, I think the third one. It's like basically very similar to the original, but in like, it's a bit of an odd one, the third game in the series, but there is a third game. It's Dynamite Cop Asia, that's it. It's a bit of a weird one. It's like the first 2 characters again. There's like a remake of the first one, just with better graphics, with different dress styles and stuff, in costumes. It's a bit funny one.
I have to look that up. I really like those, the Dynamite Cop games. But the whole weird Die Hard thing is like got that hilarious artwork on the Saturn version where you've got this weird bloke that's almost Bruce Willis but not quite, because they didn't want to pay for his likeness, so they just got a bloke in a vest that's a little bit balding with a gun, and I was like, yeah, that's nearly Bruce Willis, and a tower behind him that's obviously the Nakatomi Tower. Or was supposed to be, with an exploding helicopter, just the sort of, the iconic things. But yeah, I'm trying to hunt it down. There was a website, is it Sakator or something.com? They have a list of games that were released in. It shows you what type of case they got. I don't know how accurate it is.
.com, which is based on it's a really great Saturn site that's using they use actually the name of the budget range as well. So Sakori, that's actually the name of the budget range of the actual Saturn games as well.
They've got a really good list on their site of
that's a really great website. It's run by a fantastic, I think, a French collector.
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah, and it's a great way to see what came in what case.
And all that type of stuff. And they're actually a good one if you want to check revisions and even, I think, get an idea of what game's got a PAL or a Japanese or a US release, because that site just lists everything. It really is a Saturn's collector's paradise.
Yeah, check it out if you're into your Saturn collecting. But funny enough, as we're talking about different countries and different releases, what we actually want to look at today is PAL versus NTSC. So I've already touched upon the TV standards right at the beginning before we digressed a tad. But yeah, Riven is a bit of an expert on this stuff. So I think it stems from when we had a quick little chat before we actually went live. There was also the different TV standards, but we were obviously brought up on the popular systems in the 80s were designed for UK TV. So we didn't have any concept really of 50 hertz v 60 hertz until we got the Japanese consoles that started to take over.
Yeah, no, that's exactly that. I mean, sort of Spectrum and Amigas, all those games were designed to run at 50 hertz, whereas once, like you said, once we get the Japanese consoles, that's when things started to go a bit awry, because Sega and Nintendo didn't optimize their consoles for PAL. They could have actually specifically built, but because they were slightly, I think, narrow-minded a bit when they were actually building their consoles, so they only designed them for 60 hertz and not 50 hertz, and as a result we get a lot of problems. And it's what's really, when things get a really bit messy, is when the Japanese tried to optimize their games to run in PAL. So you'd take a NTSC game and they'd try to optimize it so the PAL version would be closer to the NTSC version, and that brings about its own set of issues, as I've since discovered, in an awful lot of games.
Yeah, so you've obviously got direct comparisons between let's say an American or a Japanese release of a game on a console like the Saturn or the Mega Drive to the PAL release, the European / UK / where there's PAL standard in the world. And there's a lot of interesting, should we say, sort of artifacts that occur. Now, one that I've mentioned before that is the biggest, is the most obvious one to me, is Sonic the Hedgehog on the Mega Drive, the first one. And it's odd because obviously, you know, Stu had this as well. We were obviously brought up on that version of the game, so we didn't really have any awareness of the difference between this and American version.
Play it, just sorry to interrupt you there, Trev.
Go for it.
I thought it was an amazing game. I loved it. You know, I used to go to my friend's house, play it. Then I had it. I'd play it, and to me, it was, you know, one of the perfect games that I used to love playing. So, and when people talk about 50, 60 hertz, now, you know, forgive my ignorance here, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know people talk about it, and, you know, I know some games, they don't run fast enough. But I remember these games being, you know, getting 10 out of 10s in magazines. Everyone loved them. We all love playing. So, you know, what's the problem? So I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here to understand it a little bit better.
My experience. Sorry, God, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting one, because I have occasionally seen people who say, hey, I want to play the games as I remember them, and I want to remember them because basically the bottom line is basically PAL is 576i and only uses 50 frames a second, whereas NTSC is 480i and is 60 frames a second, because at the time TV was primarily, I think, 24, 25 frames up to 30 sort of in PAL. So they never really thought they were going to need those extra frames, I think, in a lot of things. You didn't really use 60 frames in a lot. And I think it's only really games that really start. I think video games are basically one of the things that really started pushing sort of the frame rate and stuff. And when you started having consoles developed for NTSC, they found that when basically you transported the game into a PAL console, the game would be basically 10 frames behind every second if it was 60 frames, slightly less if you're doing a 25 frames. But basically it introduces a whole set of issues. The other thing is, because you have a 480 picture displayed in a 576i window, you end up with borders at the top and the bottom of the screen. Now, I think back in the 90s and even the 80s, if you had the sort of NES at the time, so many people would have been oblivious of these issues, and you just wouldn't notice them, especially when you were younger. You would never have noticed these issues. But I think the crux of the matter is, and certainly coming from a development background, I know myself, no Japanese developer ever intended their game to be run at 17 or 20%, depending which way you look at it, basically game running slower than it should have been. And basically no developer would ever want someone to play an inferior version of their game where the aspect ratio is not looking correct and the game's actually running slower.
Yeah, so the obvious thing, you already mentioned it there, but the game is literally slower, and you can feel that. So as I was saying, like Sonic the Hedgehog is a really good example because that game is about speed. So my experience growing up, obviously, it played just the way it played. I didn't know any different. But then when emulators came out, like probably Genesis is probably the one that I probably first played on the PC in the late 90s, you'd get the ROM from whatever dodgy site you got your ROM from. Not going to say where you would do that. And
technically naughty, I should say naughty, but I think a lot of people have been guilty of that over the years. Certainly, I think for a lot of people, it was a great way to actually experience games they'd never even played before. Because
100%, yeah,
it is, it is, still is to this day. You would get the emulator, you would, and obviously that would just play games. Well, you could choose. There would be settings to play. If there's PAL only games, because obviously there is PAL only games on some of the Japanese consoles only released in the UK or Europe.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a few on the Mega Drive that are PAL only, so some interesting stuff.
Yeah, and then you would have but then you would play Sonic, but then Sonic, the ROM you would get probably was the original Japanese or American version that was later converted to work on our PAL TV. So I'm pretty sure when I first played that in an emulator, I was like, well, this is kind of weirdly a bit faster. The music seems higher pitched. But okay, whatever. Maybe that's just how this emulator works. And over the years, that is the version of the game that I've played now, ever since the late 90s in the emulator, going up through, the various compilations that came out when when it gets released on a virtual console. So now I'm completely reprogrammed to have that as the default one. And now I remember when I got a multi-mega, which Stu now has, funnily enough, my multi-mega, and I played Sonic the Hedgehog on that. I was like, oh my God, this is like molasses. It's like, it was like such a jarring experience. I think the music being slower emphasizes it, whereas there's a lot of other PAL games where the music isn't affected because it's, but the gameplay is affected, but not the music.
Yeah, no, I really hate when they do that. Basically, they optimize the music and then they don't optimize the rest of the game. I mean, it's nice that they did it for PAL, but it effectively fundamentally breaks the game so that what you're playing at 50 hertz isn't the true experience. So when you speed it up, if you use a modded console or force it via using an NTSC console, basically you then get it's totally broken for the PAL version because the gameplay is okay, but then the music's playing too fast.
That's right, yeah, and that's obviously something you'll notice. So there's that. There's the gameplay stuff. But obviously, again, you touched upon it. Is the actual resolution? So we have a much higher resolution. The PAL system versus the NTSC. There's more lines of horizontal resolution, and that just means to sort of shoehorn an NTSC game into PAL. Instead of trying to increase the resolution of the game, which might be quite taxing to do that and actually natively render the game at PAL. It might be taxing on the processor that it's running on. They would just put some borders of black borders, almost like it was like you'd have with a widescreen movie on a square TV.
Yeah, and you'd end up with it basically being squished. I think it primarily is because what it normally is doing is it's displaying the 480 window inside the 576i screen.
Yes.
Basically the unused lines basically are showing nothing, hence the black borders. Although in some cases, like with Sonic and the Mega Drive, because of how the Mega Drive works, you'd often get the background color displayed, so you get like a blue at the top and the bottom of the screen on a real Mega Drive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, almost like kind of nearly blends, but it doesn't really sort of.
It just sort of looks a bit weird, really, and you're like, it's just one of those sort of very unfortunate quibbles.
Yeah, and it really was a standard thing in consoles until I would probably say I think the Dreamcast was the one that really started to make an effort to eliminate it as an issue because that supported something called PAL 60, which is a game that used the PAL resolution but ran at 60 hertz. So
yeah, I think 60 hertz when the Dreamcast really was the first console that really actually did proper 60 hertz, at least in Europe and on the PAL territory. They may have, I don't know about the 3DO or whether any of the other ones did it, but as far as I'm aware, I mean, the Saturn, you had some well optimized games that they were nearly as good as their NTSC counterpart. But aside from a sort of handful of the big Sega titles, a majority of the Sega Saturn games were still unoptimized. I mean, the Dreamcast, like you said, wasn't quite as good as it should have been, because there were a lot of games that they didn't bother to support 60 hertz in. It's infuriating. And ironically, I did discover there's quite a few games you can use cheat devices, or you can either force them into VGA to get 60 hertz, or you could use cheat devices to get them to output 60 hertz. So you could nearly get most of them, but it was still annoying that a lot of developers occasionally didn't include 60 hertz. I mean, oddly enough, I remember Evil Twin, I think that one in the manual said there was a 60 hertz mode, and when you checked in game on the Dreamcast, there wasn't, but you could play it via VGA. So, and that was 60 hertz whenever you played any game via VGA on the Dreamcast.
There's one that I really like, Sega Rally 2. That didn't get so the PAL version isn't 60 hertz, so you got big borders.
Yeah, I think
it runs
Sega Rally 2 supports VGA, but yeah, it doesn't have. But back in the but no one in '99 or 2000 had. Very few people had VGA. So back then, you were like you playing it on the borders. And I just remember being quite irritated at the time playing games like Sega Rally and Virtua Fighter, because I think the first game we played on the Dreamcast was like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Christmas one year, and so that was 60 hertz, and we were like, oh, this is really nice and shiny, because I think at that point we'd modded our Saturn. And then when you go play games like Sega Rally 2 and they didn't have a 50 hertz option and you get the borders again, I remember like feeling a bit sort of really annoyed about it, and then sort of avoiding some of those games because like it's not full screen.
Yeah, there was other, it's not even an excuse with it being an early game. I mean, you got like Sonic Adventure was a launch game, and that had a 60 hertz option. Soul Calibur had 60 hertz, although normally like the Dreamcast BIOS, it wasn't 60 hertz, so you got borders on that as well.
The BIOS it wasn't 60 hertz. I suppose that was just a caveat, so that whatever TV it was put on, it was going to run, because there were people who. I mean, probably. Because by the Dreamcast era, I know most of my friends we were using RGB SCART leads to get the best picture at that point and stuff. But I know that you'd still get some people playing on an RF cable, getting a really wibbly picture and just playing at 50 hertz on some knackered old black and white.
Because the problem I always used to have, I don't know if you maybe explain this. Back in the day, I would have. I think someone modded my machine, and if I played American games or certain games, it would all be in black and white on my screen.
Now that's one of two issues. Either that your TV didn't support 60 hertz when you forced it into, or it could have been that your PAL mod, which is another issue that we sort of touched on a bit earlier when we were chatting, is that PAL modified consoles aren't necessarily true 60 hertz or full correct NTSC speed. Sometimes they can run at a non-standard NTSC speed. So, for example, some of the Mega Drives output, if you up a true Mega Drive, I think is 59.94. And if you mod a PAL Mega Drive, you get like 59.3. And a lot of TVs don't like that 0.3 because it's not a correct refresh rate. And oddly enough, there are some games that do those type of weird refresh rates, but a lot of TVs don't like it. I mean, so I think in the PAL Mega Drive's case, you can do an additional mod to correct that issue, but you do have to be wary of PAL modified consoles. And these days, I would probably only recommend, unless you can't get an NTSC console, because the annoying thing with NTSC consoles, you have to get step down converters, because of course a lot of them don't support our power supply directly. You just plug them directly in, pop, bang goes the console. And I've seen some of my work colleagues in the past do that as well on 360 power supplies. That's a story for another day. But you do
there is
have
a good
to be
site,
wary,
actually.
Basically.
Go
ahead.
With the power supplies, I've actually got a few NTSC consoles now. There's a place called retrogamesupply.com, and they actually produce new power supplies that are multi-standard, so they can switch between 50 and 60 hertz, and the different 240 volts and whatever the other system is. So you don't have to have a big old chunky step-down converter that'll put a high-pitched whiny noise out while you've got it plugged in. You can get these nice sort of almost mobile phone size sort of power adapters that will power your console. And I use one of my PC Engine Duo, so that doesn't need a step down. One of my Genesis CDX. I've got a NES. Actually, the NES I can just use my PAL Super Nintendo power adapter. That actually works.
Yeah, there are a few of them like that. I mean, that's actually good to know. You can get a sort of nice, quite good step-down converters, because I do remember some of the horror stories of the old ones. But yeah, it's weird. It's like the N64 as well. You can use a European power supply in it, because my Japanese one, I use my European supply in it. And I know some of the Mega Drive and SNESs have interchangeable power supplies. You do have to be careful, because some aren't and some are. And you have to know, because the Mega Drive 1 uses a different power supply to a Mega Drive 2, if I'm correct. I think the polarity is reversed or something like that.
I think the Mega Drive 1 power supply can weirdly power a lot of American consoles as well. I think it could do like an American NES. It could do a PC Engine. There's a whole bunch of them. Obviously, do check before you try this. Anybody listening?
Yeah, no, always check. I mean, usually the voltage is included. There's always something on the actual console, because by law they have to include what voltage and polarity it is. But I know occasionally you can get stuff that doesn't list it, so then it's a bit more precarious. Because oddly enough, my US SNES, when I got that, I noticed it had been there. The power supply had been changed, so obviously someone had previously blown it up, because I bought it secondhand for like quite cheap at the time, and the power supply had obviously been changed, so I had to figure out what it had been changed to, because obviously the original one, someone had, I think, had blown it up, and they had subsequently repaired it.
Oh, that's not good.
No, but it's still going strong, sort of 15 years after I purchased it now. So
yeah, I've got a Super Famicom actually. Yeah, instead of I've got a PAL Super Nintendo, but obviously I wanted to make sure I was all 60 hertz up. So I got
oddly enough, I have to confess, I got a Super Famicom first, and then I decided I wanted a few US games, and then I thought, I'm not going to butcher my Super Famicom by doing that horrible cart widening thing. So I bought a US SNES. So I actually have a European SNES, a US SNES, and a Japanese one. So I've got the best of all three, basically, in that case.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I have. There's the thing, isn't there, with the cartridge slot issues between American and Japanese. But at the moment now, that's not such a big deal, because I've got an ST to SNES that I use for that. The only thing I'm missing are the sort of 10 Super FX games. But I'll actually mention it in the last episode. There's a chap that makes a 10-in-1 Super FX cartridge, and you can actually put it in a shell for a Famicom. So I might Super Famicom. So I might end up going down that route, and I'll be basically covered for everything, the whole library. They're not cheap though. He charges about £100. So you probably think, I think that's probably worth it to get all the Super FX games in one. And I'm not. It doesn't look like any flash cart is going to support Super FX anytime soon. Hopefully, I'm wrong.
I've heard some interesting stories about a few of them trying to get the Super FX stuff to work. But I must admit, I'm quite, because the Super FX, I quite like to play the new Star Fox 2 on a real SNES. I know a few people have seen have sort of burnt their thing, because now Nintendo have released the finished version, and I must admit the finished version plays an awful lot better than the previous releases that sort of people have stolen and released. Because that's the thing, whenever you get unreleased copies of games, unless they've been a copy going out to journalists, I know for myself they're usually copies that have been nicked from somewhere. So
it's actually the final mastered version.
Yeah, it was really nice. I think that's really helped to sell the SNES Mini. I mean, even I really want to play that on a full-on SNES, so I might try and get myself a copy at some point, sort of homebrewed one.
Riven, I was going to ask you, actually, Trev, as well. Have you seen that new Nintendo? Oh, what's it called? The Nintendo NT. It's like a
Analog
little
NT.
Analog NT. That's it. So it's a little. I want to say FPGA console. It's about £150, and it's got HDMI out. It's got lots of different options. Is that something you would recommend for people to use to get a true sort of 60 hertz, get a good experience?
It's interesting. Those type of consoles generally can be a bit hit and miss. The analog ones actually looks to be a lot better in terms of compatibility from what I've seen from all the videos. So I know Digital Foundry and a few others have done videos. I must admit, I do like to check myself though, because a few channels I've seen in the past review those type of machines, they have been a little bit woolly about some of the issues, because even things like the FrameMeister and the OSSC, the more I've researched the devices, the more I found problems that people haven't been very forthcoming over. But the Analog NT, from what I've seen, does look to be very, very close. And I think as a good way to get a SNES console that plays on modern TVs with minimal issue, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but I know the Analog NT, from what I saw, has updatable firmware that does look to be a very good alternative. Even I was actually thinking of picking one up, because just getting it to run, because getting consoles to run on HD displays these days, if your LCD doesn't have, I mean, I'm lucky enough, I've got an LCD with a SCART, but we've got 4K telly downstairs, and that, you have, that only supports HDMI, so you need a upscaler device or some other device of HDMI. I mean, everything is going to HDMI, and all the old ports are being phased out. So certainly for ease of use, that Analog NT probably would be very good. Certainly if you're a newcomer to the SNES market, and I know it supports actual cartridges, so that will certainly be one I would recommend. I think, well, not having owned or played on myself, it does look a good alternative, that I will say.
A good point about the old ports on TVs, because I've got a 4K TV that I do use for my retro consoles, but it hasn't got a SCART. So I've got a SCART to HDMI, and that's hooked up to a band.
We've been using them for a lot of capture as well, because they are, you really need them, because our 4K is HDMI only these days, not even component on it.
Yeah, my one does have component. I've got my Xbox original plugged into that, but that's the only kind of old. It's got like a it hasn't even got a composite. It's literally just HDMI and component. But I've got a Bandridge SCART switch with that going into a SCART to HDMI. I want to get a VGA box for my Dreamcast, but I think the best one to get is that one that's actually like a VGA to HDMI that came out. Forgotten the name of it. Adam Korolik does a really good video on YouTube.
I've actually just got we got a sort of fairly cheap VGA device off Amazon, sort of the actual adapter that was fairly good. And I actually got a VGA scaler as well that was actually really nice. We actually reviewed it on the site. It was only a sort of relatively cheap one, but it gives a perfect picture, and it's absolutely crystal clear. And most VGA boxes, because unless it's a really, really cheap Dreamcast VGA, because it's going to pretty much display the same picture. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I want to add scan lines and stuff, but the whole point of VGA is that it doesn't have scan lines. One point I'd like to say about the Analog NT and a lot of those devices, a lot of those devices, because they're American made, you may find there are more issues with PAL games, because certainly as I discovered, there are some really interesting frame rate issues with some of the PAL games. Snake, Rattle and Roll was a European only, I think that was a European only Mega Drive game. And I know I had some real fun trying to capture that on the Mega Drive, because every scaler device basically would not have the signal that game outputted. It did something interesting with 576i resolution. So that they'd been optimized some way on the Mega Drive. I'm not entirely sure what way they were doing it, but basically the minute I plugged when I had it on the PAL Mega Drive, tried to capture it, aside from one of my old capture cards that could support composite, everything else, even the scalers, would just throw a wobbly. The screen would just go crazy in it when we tried to capture from it, because it didn't like the technique they were using. So that's one thing to be aware of. You may find there are literally games that on scalers are just rendered unplayable.
It's also a bit of a hazard when if you are sort of wanting to switch out your PAL consoles for NTSC ones. Obviously, did that with my NES. I've got an American NES now, but one of the game I really like on the NES is Rainbow Islands. Now there was an American version that came out, but there was a much better European only version that came out many years later, in like 92 or 91. That was the version that I play. But that's obviously a PAL game. So if I pop that into I've got like a blinking light win thing in my NES, so it's basically region free now. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because PAL games are speeded up by an NTSC console, and that pretty much makes them unplayable. So I can't play that Rainbow Islands anymore. Some people have tried to hack PAL games to run like the Super Nintendo. There's a few PAL exclusive games, like a good one is Cannon Fodder. Never came out in America, but someone actually has made a 60 hertz version. I don't know how they did it. They obviously modified the code somehow.
They've had to, or probably hacked it somehow. But yeah, you would have to, because sometimes those games, if they were purely developed for PAL, they would be running at the correct speed. It's like Rolo to the Rescue on the Mega Drive. I played through that, and I noticed that was an English developed game. The speed at 60 hertz was going too fast. And indeed, I'll bring a little industry experience here. I actually, one time I was chatting to one of the coders when I used to work on PlayStation Home, and he said he worked on one of the I think it was one of the Taki games, Taki and the Power of Juju, that series. And
Yeah.
he said that one of them, I think it was that one, or it was one of the games he worked on. He said they actually, the producer, because they were a European studio, he said, we're going to build this game entirely for PAL. So basically, they said they built the game for PAL so that it ran optimal on the European and PAL PlayStation 2. But of course, they said, well, as soon as they then ported it to the end when they did the NTSC version, the game was then running too fast, and of course you could then outrun the actual load cycle and stuff, crashing the game or falling out of the world. And they said they had to do some implement fixes to stop that, but that's actually an issue you face in PAL games. If they are correctly optimized at PAL, then when you transport them to NTSC, they are running far too fast, and even the industries you have to occasionally fix those issues.
That's kind of funny.
I have a problem on because I use the Hitachi Saturn. That's my main Saturn, and I've got the Action Replay 4-in-1 cartridge I put in. But of course, I still play a lot of Black Label PAL games, and one of them annoys me a little bit. It's actually two games. What's it? Gunstar Heroes or Guardian Heroes. That has all graphic sort of issues.
No, we actually run a full list on our website. So I think the only two games we've yet to check so far are Courier Crisis and Frankenstein, although there are a few more. But what was the other game you're having issues with? Guardian Heroes.
The other game is Earthworm Jim 2. You lose the sprite.
He goes invisible, doesn't he? Yeah,
but it makes the game completely. You can't even go, the graphics are a little bit flickery in the black background. I can still play it. You're actually.
He's invisible, I joked on.
You can see him.
Yeah, we joked on our original list when we did it that Cloaked Jim gets a stealth device, so it cannot be seen. Guardian Heroes, the PAL version, was fully optimized, and of course, you get screen blur, all sorts of issues if you run it. I would not recommend playing Guardian Heroes at all. That game is rendered completely unplayable due to the issues, as with Earthworm Jim, which are I think they're two of the worst games that basically when you force them out. Another one I actually didn't cover in our video was Touring Car. Again, a lot of the racing games are really, really bad. And we've actually got a forthcoming video that was due out today, but I've tried to export it into 4K and things didn't go as well as I'd like. But basically, Daytona USA, the PAL version, is completely altered so that it's nothing like the NTSC version. In fact, the PAL version, although they've tried to PAL optimize it and increase the speed and various other things, they've basically fundamentally broken the game from every level, from the timer no longer working in real time correctly at all and not even matching the game. They've had to tweak the timing. There's all sorts of issues. The audio the audio sort of matches up, and the game speed is actually running too fast even compared to the NTSC one. If you force it into 60, it goes even worse. So that's one game that you realize.
There's the Championship Circuit Edition. Has that solved some of the problems, or is that
probably some of the similar issues? Because I imagine that was that is PAL optimized as well.
Right,
but
okay.
Oddly enough, I mainly wanted to look at the original Daytona first before we actually started looking at the Championship Circuit Edition. The reason the other problem with Championship Circuit Edition is, I'm sure as you may not be aware, but in 1996 that was actually rushed for release in Europe and the US, and basically the European version is unfinished. There's like missing textures and all sorts of problems with it, and sort of slightly twitchy handling. I think that might actually be partly down to 50-60 hertz and how they optimized it, but the game was actually unfinished, and it's one of those things that a lot of the reviewers didn't realize at the time, that the reason that version of Daytona doesn't play that well is if you get the Japanese version, there's additional textures, there's more things to unlock. It's just a completely different game. You actually get night and daytime driving. Admittedly, it's a cheat code, but that's just some of the extras in the Japanese version that weren't in the PAL version. So
They never quite got Daytona right, did they, until the Xbox Live one? I mean, I played 2001. I used to love that when it came out, but the handling is horrible. The Saturn one is still the best one before the recent ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. The 360 version probably is. I mean, the Japanese release of CE is actually really good. I really like that one.
I'll try that, yeah.
But Daytona, the original NTSC release is probably also the best one. But yeah, the 360 version by far the best version. I'm the opposite to you. I hated Daytona 2001, and I still do because the handling is so.
Yeah, now I don't like it. I'll have to go back to
the
it.
Dreamcast version?
Yeah. Oddly enough, it was
looks
Genki
awesome.
who actually did the port of that, and they actually later admitted they didn't understand how the Daytona handling worked, because they said they tended to do more serious races with the Adobe Battle games, and their racing model and how they did racing games is very different to Daytona, and they didn't understand how the drifting, and they actually admitted in an interview. I can't remember whether life and I saw it, but I remember seeing a few interviews with them where they admitted they didn't fully understand how the Daytona handling was, and that's why 2001 didn't have the issues, because they actually did most of AM2's ports on the Dreamcast, interestingly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Virtua Strikers a game I really like. They did that, and Virtua 3TB, they did that as well. Yeah, pretty good job of those as well. Especially Virtua Striker 2 is identical, I think, but then it was a Naomi game, so I think that was just kind of,
fairly straightforward port. Yeah, I mean, Genki have done some interesting games. I actually worked with them on one of the Spectrobes as well, which was quite interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, they were quite a good studio to work with. So that was the third Spectros game on the Wii, which was probably the best one of the three we did. That was.
I find. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, you go ahead. I think probably I ended that bit there. Yeah, basically Spectros on the Wii was probably the best one we did.
Cool. I was just going to say, I mean, with something that helps a little bit with Daytona 2001. I mean, it's annoying because when you saw there was one coming out, it was the first Eurogamer do a great Digital Foundry do a great video on Daytona, but we finally got a version of Daytona that was 60 frames a second and graphically looked actually better than the arcade release, even though it was many years later.
Yeah,
but it took that long for the console to catch up. But turn the sensitivity of the handling down to basically nothing, and it's a tiny bit better, but it's still kind of shit.
Because I remember the time the reviews. Oh, you can adjust the handling, but even if I remember doing all the way up, all the way right, it doesn't matter where you put it. The handling's still pretty terrible.
And it's just such a shame because they had the victory of having the best Daytona ever in their hands, and the handling just like ruins it. It's still playable. I still enjoy it to a degree, but when you're struggling to keep the car straight, just because you just went around a little bit of a corner, it's just frustrating.
Yeah,
very difficult.
It's interesting. Although there wasn't. There was. I suppose I should mention that the Dreamcast is probably one of those consoles that there probably was some forms of PAL optimization. Because interestingly, I know with Fantasy Star Online, I don't know if you played that at all when it was back in its heyday.
Great.
You may have remembered there was a 50-60 hertz option in that.
Yeah.
And originally, 50 and 60 hertz players could all play on the same ships, and shortly after the initial, I think after a month or two, they subsequently forced all the 50 hertz players onto their own unique ship. So basically, if you went to 50 hertz, you couldn't actually play with the rest of the world. You could only play with other 50 hertz users, and the reason for that was it introduced all sorts of lag when you had some players at 50 and some players at 60. And that was one case. It's one of those interesting things. It was at the time, I think most people were on 60 by about that point. But if you were still playing on 50 hertz, you actually still got a bit of a bum experience, basically.
I mean, video games are intricately, the physics and the coding is tied a lot of the time very deeply to the frame rate. I mean, there's a great glitch that I had to get around recently. Well, about a couple of years ago, I was playing Dead Space on the PC. And I had it at an unlocked frame rate, and that's a relatively old game, and I was running on a GTX 980, which is a modern graphics card. So I absolutely rinsed through it. I was getting like 300 frames a second unlocked, and it played fine. But the trouble is, there was near the start, there's a door that wouldn't open, and I was like, "What the hell?" And I thought it was just some weird glitch, and I looked it up. Turns out that you have to lock the frame rate to 60. And then the door opens and you can walk through. So I had to get to that bit, come out, go into the menu, lock the frame rate to 60 hertz or frames per second, and then walk through the door, pause it, go back to the menu. Then I can unlock the frame rate again and get my lovely smooth, frame rate. And so it's bizarre how it can affect games in certain ways. Like,
yeah, it's interesting. If you actually have a Sega Saturn, and if you take some of the Japanese NTSC versions, there are a few of them. If you play via the PAL, if you force the Japanese games into PAL, they then subsequently have issues. I know Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter is rendered unplayable at 50 hertz. All the sprites and like stuff are all corrupted. Yeah. And House of the Dead, all the speech slurs in the Japanese version at 50 hertz, interestingly enough. So one thing I must admit, if you are ever going to import games, if you've got PAL Saturn, don't use an action replay to do it, because that will only force them into 50 hertz. I'm not actually a big fan of action replays, period. I mean, we did cover it a little bit on a video of our channel, but I probably didn't explain it well enough, because the problem is the action replays aren't designed properly, and they actually damage the pins in the back of your Saturn by forcing the cartridge slot open, because they're thicker. The board used in them is actually thicker than most standard the official official cartridges and stuff.
That's a shame, because it's like almost an essential purchase normally.
Yeah, well, that's where the myths sort of come up a lot, where people say, oh, you always use my action replay, but you get a lot of people say, oh, the Saturn has a really bad cartridge slot. And every time I've challenged people over that, I've subsequently found out they've always been using an action replay, and the reason being because there's a Daytel who used to do them, or I think they still manufacture them as well, but basically they don't use a standard PCB and actually stretch the pins out. So if you leave the action replay in, you're all right, but you are damaging your Saturn permanently, so that basically you won't be able to subsequently use official cartridges, or even sort of the 1MB, 4MBs, or, because you have to remember there are two games, King of Fighters 95 and the awful Ultraman game, that use ROM cartridges that are unique to those games. Admittedly, only King of Fighters 95 anyone wants to play. I have actually got both, but the Ultraman game is awful. But basically, they used unique ROM cartridges to actually have the data on the cartridge, and King of Fighters 95 was probably by far the best port as a result of that, but Sega realized the ROM cartridge was too expensive to produce for every single game, so that's when they did the RAM cartridges.
Yeah, we actually got that in the UK, didn't we? I think we got the 1 meg, didn't we, with King of the Fighters?
No. King of Fighters 95 comes with the ROM cartridge, but yes, we did get King of Fighters 95.
Isn't it with the King of the Fighters game? If you play it without the cartridge in, it's something like you don't get the backgrounds, or you don't get the sprites, or something.
Loading slower, isn't it, and stuff? Yeah.
It might be with 96, 97. If you try and run 95, it will, without the ROM cartridge, it will bring up an error message. It will ask you to insert the cartridge. I know you have to be careful, because what a lot of people don't realize is SNK only designed their games to work with the 1MB. You should never, ever, ever use the 4MB with them. Hence why action replays aren't necessarily a good idea, because they can't necessarily distinguish which version to use. But basically, if you play some of the SNK games with the 4MB, they exhibit problems not present when the 1MB. I know King of Fighters 97, the load time is like doubled, even though you would think it would be quicker because it's 4MB, but basically the SNK games, because they're only designed with the 1MB in mind, they can't correctly read the 4MB cartridge. So that's another thing. It's always a good idea to actually find out whether the game used the 4MB or the 1MB. Again, with Marvel Superheroes from Capcom, that was designed to use the 1MB, and it's got additional slowdown if you use the 4MB.
Well, that's a great tip there. People are
get rid of your
cartridge.
What was that problem? Sorry, with the Xbox One when that was first released? Because I remember that was the whole operating system was in 60 hertz, but then you could play in the corner of it. You could have the TV signal coming through, and then that was at 50 hertz, of course, in the UK. And they had. It
would have been these days. I think all our TVs 60 hertz now, isn't it? Because
I think the actual signal or
the
something.
Signal might still have the 50 hertz analog signal at that point. I can't quite remember when they switched it off.
The analog. I can't quite remember the issue, but there was something about people were putting. Do you remember? It's got the HDMI in, so they would have their Sky boxes or their Freeview boxes coming through their TV. And the whole idea originally with the Xbox One, you could have, Emmerdale going on in the corner and then be playing...
Dream.
Yeah, be playing, I don't know, Gears of War in the rest of the screen. So
yeah, I remember there being an issue, but I can't quite remember what the issue was because I've not actually got an Xbox One. I kind of got put off by all the sort of the non-game stuff they did at the start, where they really did. I mean, certainly from the industry perspective, there were a lot of people who were very, very unhappy with what they did with it.
And recovered, I don't think, really. Have they? The gap is still fairly big.
Yeah, I mean, they caught up a bit. They've done some nice things, but I think they're entirely playing catch up. Interestingly, at the time when they were, one of the interesting things that I know they said about industry wise is that Microsoft haven't made a huge amount of profit from the Xbox, and there was some talk of them actually selling off their Xbox division just before the Xbox One. So I think they've obviously stuck with it for now, but whether they will keep making consoles, I'm not so sure, because the thing is, stuff like for them, it really is chicken feed how much money they make on the Xbox One and 360, and they don't make a huge amount of money. I remember certainly the live costs are vastly more expensive per user than what you actually subscribe to because of all the setups and stuff. But it's certainly been interesting. I would be interested to see if Microsoft continue console development in the future. That's what I will say, because I don't think the Xbox One has been anywhere near, and I think you said they're still playing catch up, and I think the Switch looks like it's going to take over Japan largely. So I think Microsoft are going to find themselves really squeezed out this and perhaps the next generation as well.
No, they haven't done themselves any favors. One thing I was wondering, actually, so when we got to sort of the PlayStation era, we got to games that would be consistently sort of 30 frames a second and less, because obviously they were using sort of 3D engines, and it was the very early days of 3D, so games couldn't really run at 60 frames a second unless it was some kind of like, a one-on-one fighter like a Tekken, when they could, when the rendering sort of the rendering budget was a lot less than what a game that had to render an entire scene or something. So I mean, in terms of the PAL versus NTSC, if the games that sort of have those sort of 30 FPS and below, or they sort of wobble between just going over that or under
I have pondered that. I know what you mean. You're debating whether the PAL games in theory were designed to then run at 30 frames as well. I've been pondering that myself, because I've not researched as much as I would like, but usually what would happen is the PAL game, the NTSC would run at 30 and the PAL one would run at like 25 frames a second. For example, Daytona, USA, as I discovered recently, the NTST one, when we're certainly covering this in our video as well, the NTST runs at only 20 frames a second, but the PAL version runs at 17. Now, you'd thought they might have done something to make sure the frame rates match. And I think there is some inherent issue with the frame rate, but I don't think developers generally try to go around it, because I mean, even Nintendo always seem to, they used some really janky fixes by cutting out frames. They never quite corrected it, and you would have thought 30 frames they would have done, but it seemed to still reduce. So you got 13 like 25 frames, I think. So I think it's one that probably needs more research on. They didn't seem to do it, so there must have been a reason why they didn't do it. But I know perhaps there are one or two optimized games that have it. I mean, there's so many games. I mean, until you start looking at every game, you don't realize the changes between the PAL and NTSC version of every game. Means literally every game will have changes between them. And when you start really studying it, you realize it really is an undocumented minefield, I have to admit.
Yeah, in my mind, I thought, well, obviously, neither of these games are using the maximum refresh rate of either standard. So you
would expect it to be
the same when it was like a 30 FPS sort of game. But I guess no, there's still sort of quirks about running a game on, even if it's not a 60 hertz game, on a PAL TV. That's interesting. Another thing, you say you got a VGA box. Is that a pain to use when you have to switch it out when there's a game that's not a VGA, or do you have a boot disc that you just use to sort of force those games into VGA?
Now that's an interesting one. Generally, if you've got the right switch, if you've got the right VGA box, we've got one with the switch, so you can do the old switching technique, and generally most games can be forced into VGA. Cool. I think it's about 95% of the Dreamcast games support VGA or can be forced into VGA. there are some discrepancies, and you have to be a bit wary of some of the lists out there, because there are, again, it's an NTSC issue. There are some PAL games where the NTSC version has VGA support and the PAL version had VGA support stripped out.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
why would they do that? What would be the reason?
I have no idea. I mean, I'll give you two cases in point, and one of which is Skies of Arcadia, which the PAL version, for some reason, the VGA mode stripped out. It's 50 hertz only. There's no 60 hertz mode. The game has been partly PAL optimized, but still doesn't quite run correctly to the NTSC version. And if you can't force it into 60 either, it'll just crash. It's a weird one. I don't know why they did that. My only speculation is they had some bug at 60 hertz they couldn't correct, or possibly it could be a space issue because they're having to add in the additional languages. But I wouldn't have thought you'd stripped out a VGA mode just so you could fit in the language data. I know you have had issues in the past with some games because you have to add in French, Spanish, German, Italian. It can get a bit if your game's already running low on space, to add in pages and pages of text. I mean, when you realize how big the text was at files in Skies of Arcadia, you realize it's going to take up a bit more space on the disk. But yeah, another one that got a hugely bad optimization. If you actually go to our YouTube, we actually had a video of Code Veronica, and I realized when I was playing that video, and that video is the reason I subsequently went and bought an NTSC version, the PAL version is ghosting because of how badly they optimized it. They stripped out the VGA for Resident Evil Code Veronica. Again, they removed 60 hertz, and this was IDOS who published it as well. Basically, if you watch the PAL version, it's actually, if you play it, it's actually ghosting. They basically screwed up the resolutions, frame rate so badly the game actually ghosts. You get an image, you get a ghosting there's the same issue you sometimes get if they badly convert a film to PAL from NTSC, and that when I realized that playing it again, because I always remember playing Code Veronica thinking the PAL version has some weird issues, and I played it again about 15 years later when I did that video. It's been a really long time since I played it, and instantly I thought, right, I'm buying a NTSC version. I bought the complete edition, and as soon as I played that on VGA, I realized what a better experience it was and how badly they'd screwed up the PAL version. And that was IDOS who had released the PAL version. So I've got no respect for. Mind you, I did work with a few people at IDOS, so yeah.
Well, that's annoying. That's the version I've got. I'll have to sort of grab it is on my list to get an NTSC Dreamcast.
You want an NTSC version of Code Veronica? The PAL version is just awful, absolutely awful.
And I think my PAL games, is there a problem if I wanted to play those on NTSC? I guess obviously use a boot disc.
Yes, most should run with a boot disc unless they don't work. If, like Code Veronica, they only work in 50 hertz, they're going to screw up completely when you try and force them. I mean, some might work. I mean, generally,
put them into 60 hertz, wouldn't I? If they have the 60 hertz option, like I would have done anyway, if it was on the PAL console. Yeah.
I mean, generally, like you said, most of them, although you can use switches, we use the Exploder as a boot disk, and that works with about 90% of games because that forces them into 60 hertz or VGA. The Exploder I actually found better to use than the DCX, but there were one or two games that didn't work with the Exploder and one or two games that didn't work with the DCX, so I actually use a combination of both. But the Exploder is a great way to force a game into VGA, that I have noticed, because the Exploder just straight up loads. You whack in the disc, you load it, and because weirdly enough, there are a few PAL games like Evolution where they implemented a bug where the VGA mode is included in the game, but they implemented a bug they kept the screen that says this game doesn't support VGA, so that screen pops up, won't allow you to run it, but the VGA is in the game, and as soon as you bypass the screen, even just by turning on the VGA a second or two after that screen pops up, the game works perfectly. So there are a few games where because I think a lot of devs didn't test for VGA at that point, so they may have designed the game to have it, but they didn't properly check it. And certainly, if you're doing the PAL version, you may have been testing the NTSC version and not been checking what was going on in the PAL version. Because having known testing myself, some things can get missed, and no one thinks of doing it.
And it's weird because I kind of feel like they did try and promote the VGA mode in Europe. I mean, the boxes had a whacking great big logo on the back saying VGA compatible. So it's odd that it was so patchy in some respects. And it was a very forward-looking console as well. I mean, the 60 hertz PAL 60 modes and the VGA modes, they weren't really adopted by very well. Just by the the PS2 had none of that really.
No, I mean it was. I think it's one of the first consoles that supported progressive scan, if not the first. I'm not going to quote for self. I'm sure it was certainly one of the earliest ones. I mean, you had that was certainly one of the that was the first one I can remember, but there may have been another that supported progressive scan earlier, and proper progressive scan, not 240p, which is actually just a trick within the 480i window, because a lot of people say, oh, it's 240p, but that's actually a trick within the 480 window. It's still being displayed at 480, but for consoles anyway, and that is an interesting little trick they did to get that effect. But basically, I think progressive scan, the Dreamcast, is one of the first proper ones outside of actual monitors and PCs.
Yeah, and also the PAL 60 thing. I mean, I think a GameCube had that, and I think the original Xbox did. That was actually the BIOS menu, isn't it?
Yeah, although there are some games on the original Xbox that still don't run at 60 hertz. Apparently, Halo is one where Bungie admitted there was a bug and they didn't implement the 60 hertz mode correctly.
So if you've got it in the menu selected as 60 hertz for your console, it
still runs in 50 hertz Halo. Basically, even if it's set in the BIOS, the game doesn't correctly read it. It just goes straight into 50 hertz. But you think, because it was the Xbox One was full screen, so it was very deceptive whether the game was running at 50 or 60 hertz. Actually, the Xbox, because everything's full screen, so you can't initially tell if they're running at 50 or 60 hertz.
And they were sort of trying to educate people as well at that stage about those modes. Remember Metroid Prime, I think.
That was
had a big sign in it saying 60 hertz on it.
It's weird, actually. Nintendo really annoyed me because they do a bit of both. There were some games on the Wii that were 60 hertz only, others that were 50 hertz only, and it's really irritating. Nintendo.
Wow.
Yeah, there are some. Same with the GameCube. There's some 50 hertz, 60 hertz. So I tend to regard them as the same console, the Wii and the GameCube, because they are actually. They literally. Well, I worked in development at the time, and literally, like I said, the early Wii games were programmed on GameCube development kits, because aside from some minor hardware changes, there were some slight internal differences. Basically, the Wii was just a repackaged GameCube with a few minor differences.
Because I remember back in the early days, it was Dead or Alive 4. The first one that came out on the Xbox 360, and that had on the back, it was almost like a great big warning sign. It's 50 hertz only. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I remember a few of them. Well, like one brought back comes to mind.
Dead or Alive 4 was 60 hertz only.
No.
Yeah, we've probably been 50 hertz, I think. I've got a few games from that first year or two. Yeah,
and I remember some people, they just couldn't play it. It was absolutely, it just wouldn't go past the start menu at the beginning. And then they brought it into the shop and complained. We popped it into our machine and it came straight up on our TV. Yeah, here you go, no problem. Play. What are you talking about?
It sounds like, they probably had, the game was probably 60 hertz only. And I think they had a 50 hertz TV. So it wouldn't have worked. Yeah, that's right. And your TV in your shop would have been 60 hertz if it wasn't mega old. So yeah,
because you've got to remember every Xbox 360 game had to support 60 hertz when it started using 480p, 720p, or 1080p.
I mean, they had a restriction. I remember it was a news article that I read. The games had to be 720p natively. You weren't allowed to release a game that rendered a game less than that, and then it upscaled it. You had to actually do that. But then when game engines got more complex, when you hit sort of 2010, 2011. The devs were like, look, we're going to, the frame rates are going to be horrendous on these games we're making. Can you get rid of the stupid limit? And they were like, yeah, all right. So that's when you started getting, games rendering at lower resolutions and then being blown up to 720p by the upscaler in the Xbox. So yeah. I think there's
the upscale to 1080p, but I know there are some games that do look a bit janky, I have to admit, even at 720p and 1080p. Interesting enough, the Xbox 360 is, although you can still run games at 50 hertz. That console kind of did away with 50, 60 hertz. But what's interesting is, and I don't think many people realize this, the PlayStation 3 did not support 60 hertz if you run it via 576i, because what a lot of people forget is that the PlayStation 3 could be played via RGB SCART. there are some games that are not even optimized. So if you play them, you still get the classic slowdown and you still get the classic borders. Admittedly, most people would, of course, by playing via HDMI. I know I did, but it was still fun occasionally. I did it once or twice, stuck in the RGB start on the PS3 just to play a few of the games to see which were 50 hertz and which were 60. And there's some interesting things because not every game on the PS3. So technically, the PS3 is the last console to have issues with 50 hertz, but by then, of course, everyone's using HDMI. But it's something, anyone asks you a bit of trivia, you can say there are some unoptimized PAL games on the PlayStation 3.
I probably would have encountered that because when I got my PS3 in 2007, not long after it came out, I didn't have a HD TV. I had a little old 14-inch Philips CRT, and I plugged this amazing, 7th gen behemoth of a console into that just with the component cables. I had a component to SCART adapter that came in the box, and I just had to connect it to that for a while. And I think, so I don't know if Resistance Fallen Man, probably some of those early games, I probably was playing happily at 50 hertz, not knowing I was playing like a gimped version of a game. Well, I think those like 60 hertz only warnings, like on 360 games, seems to be the ones where they were really worried about that. I think they disappeared after about 2 or 3 years. I don't remember going any further.
They didn't last long, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've got a copy of Pro Evo 6. That's got a whacking great big, this is 60 hertz thing on it. But after 2007, I don't think they bothered anymore because it's just TVs. Everybody had kind of moved on by that point.
Yeah, I think most people sort of 720. I oddly enough, I think I played. I know in 2006 I still had an old CRT because I was playing my original Xbox on it. And when I got the 360, initially you're playing that on a sort of CRTV, but fortunately you could run internally on 60 hertz. But yeah, I think a lot of people, some people did still use CRTVs. Oddly enough, the weirdest TV I played, back when I was younger, the old TVs, and I sort of managed to grab an old black and white one time so we could actually have that in my room. So for a long time I used to have my N64 on a black and white RF lead as well playing. Classic. So it was like
the worst possible connection.
But the worst possible connection just so I could actually play games in my room.
LGR is a great video where he hooks up I think it was an Xbox One or a PS4 to a black and white 4x3 TV.
Yeah, I saw that. I think connected it to I think it was a PS4 with Fallout 4. That was genius. Actually, that really was. I thought, that is kudos to doing that.
Goes to show it works. He was able to play the game. It looked a bit weird.
Yeah, so at least we can basically I suppose not upscale, downscale
massively.
To play your spanky console on an really old black and white TV.
Okay, right, guys. Well, I think we've gone well over an hour there. I think we probably could have gone on for another couple of hours.
Probably a good time to wrap up. One thing I will say is the PlayStation is actually quite interesting in terms of 50, 60 hertz because the PAL PlayStation was primarily designed to run at 50 hertz. So forcing is a big problem. You can't really force. But interestingly, and there are ways to do it on some modded consoles, but you basically need a hardcore modded console. But interestingly, a lot of PlayStation games were actually properly programmed in PAL, so there are quite a few games that don't run correctly on the NTSC version. So that's one of the few ones where I have seen NTSC PAL comparisons where the PAL version of games, certainly stuff like some of the Codemaster games, was actually better than the NTSC version.
Yeah, I can imagine the only ones that might have big problems are like the 60 hertz games. Like, there's not many 3D 60 hertz games at the PlayStation, but probably your Tekkens would be an obvious one. I can imagine we probably have. Well, I know we've got borders on all of them. I think.
Yeah, but every place. I think only
and they'd be slower as well.
Yeah, I mean, a few games like Cooler World were properly optimized, but yeah, it really does depend on the studio. It really does depend. You need to research your studio and ideally find out whether the game was primarily aimed at the PAL market, whether it was aimed at the NTSC one, because that gives you a really big hint as to whether it's going to be optimized and run correctly at PAL or not. And
potentially that little extra bit of processing power that's left over from not having to pump out 60 hertz, sometimes that would be put into the visuals, wouldn't it? And or having a more stable frame rate, whereas if it was 60 and it was a 3D game, it might drop below that. Whereas on the PAL version, we would get it would hit it more often because obviously it's only got to hit 50 or 25 as opposed to 30 or 60.
Although we're sort of wrapping up, you touch on quite a good point there because there are some games that if you run the 60 hertz version at PAL, you get things like less clipping or less flicker when they're running slightly slower.
And it's a smoother experience all around because less frames being dropped.
Although you have the consequence of the game running slightly slower, but sometimes actually having a slightly smoother experience is actually worth it.
Absolutely, yeah. Wow, well, I think we need a part 2 on this. The PlayStation there, I think, is a can of worms. I think we'll open there if we're not too careful, the first one. But
yeah, I think we will do.
Well, thanks for coming on with me. We really appreciate it.
Nice talking to you guys. Good times. And yeah, I'm happy to speak to you guys at some point in the future again.
What's the name of your YouTube channel and your Twitter? And I know you gave it to us before the video.
Certainly. Randomised Gaming. If you search Randomised Gaming, it's the UK spelling as well. So it's.
Well, that's what we like to see, the UK spellings of things.
We don't want that 60 hertz spelling.
Comes up our end.
So yeah, we've got some great content on there. So we're big fans, and a lot of the comparisons that Riven's been talking about, you can actually see them in action. I kind of stumbled across Randomised Gaming was the Saturn comparison. So do check that out if you want to see. If you want to cry about the fact that you have a PAL console, this channel will make you do that.
If your viewers stay tuned to our channel tomorrow, there will be a PAL Daytona video. Well, probably this probably goes out a few days later, I imagine. But when that one actually goes, hopefully it's due tomorrow on the 16th. But basically, we will be comparing the PAL Daytona, and that is going to really, I think that opens up a huge can of worms. But yeah, it's Randomised Gaming, and it's RANDOMISED Gaming. Our official Twitter is. We get this right, capital RDMDG Gaming, well, basically RDMD Gaming GAM, basically RDMD GAMING. That's our Twitter, and I've got my Twitter at Random Gamer Riven.
Awesome.
Our official blog is randomisedgaming.tumblr.com, and YouTube. I've actually got the randomized Twitter /RDMD Gaming. No, that's my Twitter, YouTube. But I've actually got the YouTube. Basically, search Randomised Gaming on YouTube. But I did actually manage to get the personal account, which was like YouTube Randomised Gaming, or I can't remember.
Yeah, the URL, probably URL.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head. So infrequently used. But yeah, if you search us, the blog's got everything. It's got links to the Twitter. It's got a link to the official channel. And my Twitter is RDGamerRiven.
Cool. Well, that's great. So that's where you can catch Riven. Check out his channel. It's really, really fascinating about, how we got, screwed over on some of our PAL stuff. And yeah, please check our other channels or other social media stuff we have going on. Stu, where can you grab us?
Right, you can grab us on YouTube, which hopefully you're on now. You can find us on Twitch, Stitcher and iTunes. And then we've got the website as well, consoleshock.net.
Indeed, and of course, Stu is Playnation Games.
Playnation
in
Croydon.
If you want to purchase some of those amazing PAL versions, actually, you actually have a lot of import stuff in there these days, don't you? So,
yeah, we get quite a few import games in, and it's quite interesting.
You can get your 60 hertz fix as well.
If I'm ever down in London again, I will try to nip by Croydon and drop by and say hi at some point.
Yeah, come in.
I will do if I'm ever down. There might be a few years though, Brian. I think it's been nearly 9 years since I've been in London. So.
Well, you've got good reason now.
Yeah.
Right, guys. Well, thanks for listening, guys. I'll also be back next couple of weeks with another one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.